Uh, Pleasure to be here. Appreciate you hanging around for this afternoon. And Kelly, interesting choice to choose me to talk about why I'm hopeful. Because if you ask them, as you can guess based on my accent, I'm originally from Germany, and my colleagues from medical school would have laughed that I'm talking about this, an all-American theme, if you will. And yet, as I was thinking about this, I realized, you know what, I am actually hopeful. And to give you the punchline why I'm hopeful is because I chose to be hopeful. And that is not the same as being always optimistic or temperamentally inclined, to hope for the best. I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory of, my professional career. Not too much, a psychiatrist, I'm careful with self-disclosure. just enough to maybe when you leave here, and also how I think about the philosophy of life that we all have, how you could maybe cultivate a way of thinking about hope that will actually allow you to be effective after this. Because one of the concerns I have is, this is great. This was a really inspiring afternoon here. Great people, dedicated clinicians, administrators who get it, people who, got awards for going, the extra mile. And then what, right? And I think it's hard to sustain this and then what, and figuring out what it exactly is. So I'm not going to give you what exactly it's going to be, but maybe a framework how to think about to be effective in effecting change. So look at this picture, okay? What do you notice? So number one, the obvious is this is actually me 20 years ago. And some people would say, well, you know what? The more things change, the more they stay the same. The same bad haircut, okay? Same tie and outfit, okay? And yet, things have actually changed. This is Butner State Hospital, okay? Building, what is it, 49? Who knows what went on there? And there's a bin here for smoking on hospital grounds. So in 20 years, this hospital is closed now, doesn't exist anymore. So the idea that we care for patients with serious mental illness, mostly in state hospitals, in institutional settings, is really no longer the way to care for this population. Smoking in hospitals, and in this, shouldn't really say this, but this stays in this room, right? We did smoking research here where people were actually, participated in smoking and were rewarded with cigarettes for participating in the smoking research. And this would no longer fly today, thank God. So what I'm showing you here is, in some ways things don't change, and yet I have actually now a perspective over 25 plus years in public sector psychiatry to realize, you know what, things actually do change. And so it's not necessarily true that things always stay the same. Now, things can change for the better and for the worse, and I'll come back to that point. I think that's all I wanted to say about this beautiful picture. So, one way of thinking about how to stay motivated in your job, in your life, actually, is a thought experiment that is not from me. I find it interesting. See if that applies to you, if you find this helpful as well. So number one, what is this building? This is the Pantheon in Paris, okay? What's in the Pantheon? Your heroes. So the French have Rousseau in there and Voltaire. All of you have this Pantheon somewhere. Somewhere you have people in your lives that you encountered, that you read about, dead people, alive people, that you think, this is what I learned from this person. And if you have never done this as a thought experiment, do it. And think about who those people might be. And there might be different sections in the Pantheon for your professional life as opposed to your personal life. But maybe not. Maybe they are somewhat similar. In my case, for my professional work, here's 3 people. And If you know the answer to what the quote is, you're free to go. You have the afternoon off, okay? Winston Churchill said, however beautiful your strategy, you should occasionally look at what? Thank you. You got to get all three rights, though. Rudolf Virchow, and I should have said this in German because then we would have had a dropout here. Politics is nothing else but, I'll come back to that. And then Teddy Roosevelt said, the credit belongs to the man who's actually in. Good, we'll see. We'll see, right? So these are three people, and what they said I use for teaching, but also to think about how I approach my day-to-day life as a physician, both in direct patient care, but also in my role as an administrator in the schizophrenia program to think about how to improve care for my patients. So let's see how this works. This up there, you see the picture. In France, it says no parking, okay? It's at ground level, so when you pull up with your car, you actually don't see it. Maybe it's a clever thing that the French police did, but I think it had to do with the door that needed to be opened. It doesn't work, right? So however beautiful your strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. I think this is a very important statement because it fundamentally keeps you honest. I use this with my children all the time. You know, oh, but I studied a lot. Well, that's great. You know, the process was great, but what was the outcome? How do you explain the C, right? So I do think we got to be honest in medicine. We can be very pleased with what we are doing, but in the end, are we actually getting the results that we hope to get? So yes, I think research is fundamentally critical, and not just the kind of cool, sexy research with new therapies and new treatments. And in cancer, I think we can easily be impressed by that. Rightly so. I hope that there's good research going on. Equally important, though, is the research that has to do with whatever intervention at a societal level we think about. Is it actually working? What Kelly is doing? Captain Renault is who? Captain Renault is a fictitious character. Vichy, France. Casablanca, okay? It was a corrupt official, the police there. Casablanca was an interesting place in the 40s. There was a mixing of the German occupiers. Americans hadn't entered the war actually quite yet, but there were expatriate Americans and French, mostly collaborators, but also people kind of running their own business. And this is what he says about basically a nightclub and gambling den. That's what this place was set up for. I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in there. Okay? If you haven't watched Casablanca, I mean, there's incredible lines like that. And you've heard this before. One of my colleagues actually said this. This is basically saying the same, and I heard it first from Don Berwick, who in Massachusetts, many of us know. All organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get. If you combine this, what Churchill said, I think at least we should be honest. And I'm not going to talk about politics too much. I'm going to have one slide about this. At least we should be honest. We should not be shocked to find the results that we get, that our patients are systematically excluded from care, if we have systems set up that don't fund the things that might be necessary to not exclude them. This is where Virchow I might be the only one who knows here how to pronounce Virchow, right? Virchow. Virchow. And I'm going to translate this here so it's more helpful. But this is actually the original quote because it often gets butchered. He said, I only have it here in German, okay? He basically says, medicine is a social science. That's the science of here. Medicine is a social science and politics is nothing else but medicine on a larger scale. Medicine on a larger scale. And that, I came to that over time as a physician. I didn't appreciate that. Virchow is a scientist. He founded cellular pathology, very relevant for cancer. He was the guy who said that disease comes from diseases of the cell. Okay? He said it in Latin, but I'll spare you that. And he was also a politician. He was a very successful politician. He participated in the Revolution of 1848, that failed. But here was a guy who many of us would say this is the paradigmatic scientist, and yet he appreciated that he's not doing this for the science as a means in and of itself, but in the end, because he has a larger role to play. And I'll return to this point, what our role might be. And because not everybody can be like him. Not everybody is going to be running for office and get elected and, you know, be out there picketing or something. But I think there's other ways of actually seeing this as your role. I'm going to say one political thing, and this is this quote. It's a little hidden there. If this sounds like the New Left from the 60s, it sounds like it because it is. Okay? This is from Herbert Marcuse, who actually taught at Brandeis after he left Europe. Some of you might know. And this is a lecture he delivered at the Free University of West Berlin, which is another example, and I picked that actually on purpose to show that things do change. I grew up in West Germany. I'm actually in my past, I was born in West Germany, not Germany. Germany didn't exist as an entity when I was born. It was West Germany. And I never anticipated, 1989 reunification and subsequent things. So sometimes things do change. This is what he said in 67. Today, any form of the concrete world of human life, any transformation of the technical environment is a possibility. This would mean the end of utopia, that is, the refutation of those ideas and theories that use the concept of utopia to denounce certain socio-historical possibilities. We don't really write like that anymore, but what is he saying? He's basically saying anyone who says this is utopia and it can't be done, very often this is just an excuse to not think about how to do it. And he wrote this in 67. This is an example. We are a rich society. We can figure out how to take care of patients with serious mental illness, in my humble opinion. We make choices to not do it. But at least we should be honest. And so this is, for me, always a reminder when people say it can't be done. Well, why is it that it can't be done? There might be things that are outside of our reach. But this he wrote in the 60s. It's a reminder to be... It's a red flag when people really say can't be done for X, Y, or Z reasons. Now, I'm from Stuttgart, Germany, and in that sense, I always have to say, you know, my favorite philosopher is Hegel. Hegel is unreadable in German and in English, okay? I never really read anything by him, and yet I realize now that we are all Hegelian at heart. And Martin Luther King actually said it more clearly. He says, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I do believe, and that's a tricky thing, that deep inside we all believe that to some extent. And if not, we would like to believe it. Because the opposite of this is cynicism and nihilism at its worst, which I don't think are productive attitudes to have towards society and towards living collectively. So let's just leave it at that. I want to come to this. So what does this mean actually, right? So, you know, I have a guy who says, well, look at the results occasionally as being honest. I pointed out, you know, in a way, big things, structural things, you know, politics do matter for what we do. And that's the crux of the problem. This is an incredible room full of people. If you work twice as hard, it's going to make zero difference in the big scheme of things. It's going to make an important difference for some selected patients, don't get me wrong. And that's all good. But unless our individual efforts translate into structural change, it's going to be really hard to sustain momentum and to, in the end, actually shift care towards better care. Not just for the patient in front of you, but the patient who's also not in the office because he can't get into the office with you. So there's this dialectic, this tension between your individual efforts and the structures. And it can be very demoralizing if you think about it, because I think a lot of people feel, there's nothing I can do. I'm not in politics, right? And this is where I'm closing here. You might notice I started with an Anglo-Saxon, then I went to continental Europe, and now I'm closing with an American. I've lived here for 30 years, so there's a reason, because I think one of the strengths of America, I came from Stuttgart, a small town in the middle of nowhere in Central Europe, right, with a suitcase. And here I'm speaking today. The strength of the system is that individual initiative actually does get rewarded, I believe, more than in many other countries. And what did Roosevelt say? Right, in 1910, he spoke at the Sorbonne. You see where I spend my vacation and take pictures, right, for talks. He gave a famous and excellent speech on citizenship in a republic. And this is what he said. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong the man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives violently, who errs, who comes short again and again because there's no effort without error and shortcomings, but who has actually strived to do the deeds. And he goes on and lists, what it actually means. So don't stand by the sidelines. Not today, not tomorrow. Okay, you being here, I think, is a good starting point. And I think what I talked about at the beginning, cultivating an attitude that change is possible and that there's a hopeful attitude, this should give you hope because you don't have to go into politics. We are very powerful as physicians. I'm talking about because we have a voice as physicians, other people too, but I'm talking as a physician here. And I always tell my residents, when they say, oh, there's nothing to be done, I ask them, are you on the forms committee? Okay. I've never been on the forms committee as a physician. That's the last place I want to be. Okay? And yet, that would be one way of actually affecting change in the system. By looking what committees exist in systems and becoming part of the solution, as opposed to leaving it to somebody else, who then we grumble, oh, that person shouldn't be on the forms committee because he's too obsessive, right? So instead we just focus on our own things. So I want to leave you basically with this idea that, yeah, you probably alone you can't change the world, and collectively it's going to be difficult if collectively we don't act collectively, but many people working together and acknowledging that with this hopeful attitude that change could actually happen. Change is not inevitable, and it can go the wrong direction. I come from a country that is responsible for a terrible 20th century because not enough people did the right things. And I think we are at a critical juncture here in the United States, in Europe as well, for the next decade, to think about which way do we want to go. At least let's be honest about it. I think we have the tools today to create a better society. It hinges on all of us, and at least at a local level, I think it's a possibility without the constraints. That's why I'm talking about hope. Hope is just something that is potential. It doesn't have to happen. And I was accused this morning when I spoke about this by my front desk, not accused, he said, oh, are you going to preach again? I realized, yes, I'm preaching not just to the choir, I'm preaching a little bit because I'm using this word hope. But I hope I put it in a context that you can relate to, in the sense that we all have a philosophy of life, and you can channel this energy and this goodwill that is in this room, I think, to make your workplace a better place for yourself, for your colleagues, for the patients in the end. We're in it for the patients. So thank you, Kelly, for letting me say this.